Okay, good evening, good afternoon, or good morning, depending on where you are in the world. And thank you all for joining us for the Introduction to ESG Investing session for the potential youth ambassadors for the 2022 Social Impact Investment and Sustainability Conference. My name is Serena Ding, and I am a member of the Senior Advisory and Youth Mentorship Committee for the SDG and Carbon Neutrality Youth Ambassador Program. This is a new program this year for the annual Social Impact and Investment and Sustainability Conference, and it's meant to encourage youth to pay more attention to global issues such as social impact investment, sustainable development, and climate change. To learn more, please visit siisc.org, and I will put that link in the chat later as well. Before we get started today, I would just like to take a moment to thank all of our various partner organizations for helping make the Youth Ambassador Program possible this year, such as the Youth Entrepreneurship and Finance Association, Student Port, DESL, Scholars of Finance, and the Social Impact Investment Procurement Foundation. In particular, since tonight's session is being hosted by Scholars of Finance, I would really like to thank them in particular for preparing the material that you guys will be listening to today. I'm sure it will be a great presentation and everyone will learn a lot. Scholars of Finance is a rapidly growing nonprofit dedicated to investing in undergraduate students through leadership, mentorship, and support from hundreds of purpose-driven finance executives and investors. Lastly, a few housekeeping items. Everyone should be muted, so please leave your questions in the chat. You should be able to talk directly to the hosts and co-hosts, or use the raise hand function if you would like to ask a question directly, and then one of the co-hosts or hosts will ask you directly to unmute. And now finally, I am pleased to be able to present the Scholars of Finance team, Drake and Ross. The two of you now have the floor, and I'll change the host permission to you, Drake. Give me a minute.
Great. Thank you, Serena, so much for that. Ross, I'll turn it over to you to intro and we can get started. Also, just want to say, great to be here. If everyone can have their camera on, that would be great, just to make this more of an interactive session. But if you can't for whatever reason, that's totally okay too. But Ross, I'll turn it over to you.
Awesome. Thanks, Drake. Yeah, everybody on the line, whether you're in high school and college, whatever phase of life you're in, we'd love to have you join us today. And love to get to know you face to face. Ideally, this session that we have together is very, very interactive. You know, I not too long ago went to high school and college, and I know how much time you spend just having people read slides at you and just being talked at. And so ideally, we'll spend maybe 20 minutes talking, sharing some insights. This will be pretty conversational between Drake and I. And then we'll open up to primarily Q&A. So if you're at home, if you're stationary, and if you want to, definitely feel free to go video on, get ready to be an active participant along with us. Otherwise, you can comfortably listen if you want to. And today we want to give you an overview of ESG, what it is, why it's important, and how it can impact our lives. We'll go to the next slide, and Drake and I will begin just by quickly introducing ourselves. I'm Ross Overline. I am the co-founder, chairman, and CEO at an organization called Scholars of Finance. I'll give you a little bit of background in SOF in a minute, and on myself. But my background, in short, began my undergrad degree at Fordham University. I'm from Minnesota originally, lived in New York for a number of years, started my undergrad degree at Fordham as a presidential scholar, transferred and finished my degree at the University of Minnesota. I started a company in college. I got an internship at an investment bank called Piper Sandler, which was my foray into finance. From there, through some really, I would say, lucky circumstances, I was given an offer to go into a pretty big role at Twitter out of college, where I started my career. And then I've been in Silicon Valley ever since. I've been at a number of fintech companies, most recently SoFi, where I was in the leadership team launching our retail banking division. And about 2.5 years ago, I stepped in full time to lead Scholars of Finance as CEO. I will explain SOF in a minute, but Drake first, would love to invite you to introduce yourself as well.
Yeah, I appreciate it, Ross. First of all, it's great to meet everyone. My name is Drake. I am the Chief of Staff at Scholars of Finance, been with the team for about a year and a half now. So I've known Ross for a while in the organization, which is amazing. Previously, I ran 2 nonprofit organizations. I started my own social impact fintech company, and I'll be going into private equity and impact investing after college. And I also started the UPenn chapter of Scholar of Finance at the University of Pennsylvania, which Ross will talk a little bit more about what that means and what Scholars of Finance is in general. So Ross, I'll turn it over back to you.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Drake. To give a quick overview of Scholars of Finance in our organization before we dive in, Scholars of Finance is a rapidly growing organization on a mission to inspire character and integrity in the finance leaders of tomorrow. When you imagine how the world works and you imagine all the problems that the world has, we believe that through the work we do at Scholars of Finance, we stand a real chance at solving some of the major problems facing humanity. And this will actually segue really nicely into our conversation about ESG in a moment, but Scholars of Finance was built on the thesis that if you truly examine how the world works, you learn quickly that our governments, who we think are the ones in charge, especially when you're younger, you're sort of told that, the government's in charge. You start to learn that they are beholden to capital, right? Senators spend half their day fundraising. There's a lot of legislation that's been passed, FEC versus McCutcheon, FEC versus Citizens United, that have left a scenario in our hands where those who can raise the most money win elections, right? In a social democracy, increasingly elections just become popularity contests, unfortunately. And those popularity contests are won by who can raise the most money. That money is not evenly distributed. 80% of capital, 80% of money in the US, for example, is in the private sector. It's in business. So when you look at business now, so you say, okay, governments are beholden to capital. Most of it's in business. Well, now you have to look at how businesses work, how companies work. And when you're in high school, when you're in college, especially earlier in your career, until you really understand how businesses work, you think that, the CEO is the one in charge, right? The CEO has been put, the CEO has been put on a pedestal today, as if they're the ones truly running the show. But in all actuality, I'll use myself as an example, a CEO reports to a board of directors. The board of directors are in charge of the CEO. They are the CEO's boss. They actually are in charge of the whole company. And the CEO is an employee who works for them. And then when you look at your board of investors, the board are in their role on behalf of investors and shareholders, right? So the board serves shareholders. And increasingly, the money in the world, it's in fewer and fewer hands. Like fewer and fewer investors have more and more of it. At Scholars of Finance, one of our big donors, his name is Joe Martinetto. He's the chief operating officer of a company called Charles Schwab. They are now the second largest asset manager in the world. They manage $8 trillion, more money than most countries have, actually. And he talks about this a lot, how important it is that they take their jobs very, very seriously, because one wrong move can ruin the lives of tens or even hundreds of millions of people because of the sheer scale and size of their portfolio and their holdings, right? So yeah, when you look at how the world works, clearly, if you want to change the world, finance is the place to look. Finance and investors, they sort of sit on top of the entire system, right? If you were to imagine the world structurally, you have your government, you have your private sector, and you have finance, kind of on top of it, a layer across the whole thing. And so at Scholars of Finance, we recognize that finance and investing, it's just people. It's a bunch of people coming together who have designed this system and are running this system. And so it's really important that there are good people in finance. Back in 2008, 2009, there was something called the Great Recession. And it took less than 1% of finance professionals, their actions, to plunge tens of millions of people into poverty and homelessness. Call it a few thousand people, thousands of people plunging tens of millions of people into poverty and homelessness. And unfortunately, finance has gotten a really bad rap. It's gotten a really bad reputation. If you've ever seen a movie called Wolf of Wall Street or another movie called Wall Street, you see these terrible depictions of real behavior right? From a select few people in finance, and then everybody in finance and investing sort of get a bad name, right? Like it's for wolves, it's for sharks, it's greedy, it's all about money. If you want to do good in the world and you want to make an impact, don't go into finance. You should go into a nonprofit. That's where you make a real difference. But when you look at how the world works, the biggest way to make change is in finance, right? And so because it's all people, our mission is to help create a whole generation of people who go into finance and who are good people, right? Who serve a purpose greater than themselves, right? Who want to make the world better, who want to help others, who want to cure cancer, who want to address poverty and climate change, inequity and equality, right? These multi-trillion-dollar system level problems, right? They want to transform the world. And B, they do the right thing, right? They are compassionate, they're humble, they have integrity, they're courageous, they're curious, they're good people, the kind of people that we want in positions of power and influence in society, right? Not people who are selfish, greedy, self-serving. We want good people in leadership roles in finance. And that's what SOF does. We are a 501c3 organization, now at 34 top universities and HBCUs in the United States. Currently, with 800 students and members, we've reached almost 2,000 students to date, bringing together more than 500 leading finance executives and investors to teach our college students, our members, how they can be successful in finance and rise to the top, where they can make real decisions with money, staying true to their purpose and staying true to their values, staying true to who they are, never losing sight of what actually matters in life. We've raised several $1 million. We've got a national team behind these efforts, and we're super excited to be here today to talk to you about ESG. So I hope that gives you a little bit more clarity on who we are and why we're here. And with that, we want to dive into the real important stuff, which is ESG today, while you're all here. So we'll go through our agenda. First, we'll begin with an overview of ESG investing, just at a very high level. We'll talk about different types of ESG screening, which you'll understand more later. We'll talk about the history of ESG, where it stands today, and what critics have to say, and the future of ESG. And then lastly, we'll talk about careers and opportunities in ESG. So with that, we'll dive right in. If you have questions, feel free to write these down. We'll fully pull this slide out. So what is ESG and what is it for? ESG is an acronym for environment, social, governance. The definition is that it is, quote, an approach to evaluate the extent to which a corporation works on behalf of social goals that go beyond the role of a corporation to maximize profits on behalf of its shareholders. So in short, what a lot of you probably in high school and college, you learn that businesses are designed to make money, right? What ESG is helping show is that businesses can make money, but that they should go above and beyond to take care of our environment, to take care of people, and that there should be good safeguards in place against corruption, right? And wrongdoing. So to unpack each of these. So now let's say you're a company. This applies to both companies and investors, right? Let's say you're a company and you're, how about this in the chat? If somebody could, if 10 of you do, feel free, drop in the chat a couple potential products you're passionate about, a couple problems you're passionate about. Drop in the chat for us, anybody who wants to. Like a business you'd love to start one day. Just give you 10 seconds. Can a few people drop something in there for us? And I'll use one of your examples, actually. We'll give people a couple seconds to type or muster up the courage to type. Says Annabelle, thank you. Sustainable housing. Is it Tylai? Am I pronouncing that correctly? I hope I am. Single-use plastic alternatives. Magana, fast fashion, quality over price. Thank you, all three of you, for your examples here. We'll use housing as an example. Thank you, Jimmy. Robots and coding and coding for cleaning. We'll take sustainable housing as an example from Annabelle. So let's say we're building a housing company, right? We're trying to build sustainable housing. We might ask ourselves, let's take all three of these metrics. A housing company. How much are we contributing to deforestation? right? Are we planting more trees than we're cutting down? Or are we using resources that don't deplete our forests, right? Resource depletion, another example. Are we using metals that are plentiful, or are we using metals that are scarce, right? That we could run out of. Climate change, right? Are the houses that we're building, Annabelle, are they carbon neutral? Are they zero emission, right? Or are they just like, are there coal burning stoves that are just pouring CO2 into the air, right? And damaging our environment? On social, right? So now we're a sustainable housing company. Imagine we're looking at our social screening, our social metrics, worker conditions, right? Are the people who work in our factories or in our HQ, are they safe, right? Are they healthy? We're looking at diversity. Do we have a diverse workforce? Are there women, people of color? Are there people from different countries, different religious and socioeconomic backgrounds, right? Do we have a lot of different perspectives here in this company? Communities. Is the work that we're doing positively contributing to the communities that we work and operate in? You know, where we have our HQ, are we doing volunteering locally? Where we build sustainable housing, right? Are we being a good citizen in those local neighborhoods, right? Are we building them in places where the local citizens are comfortable having them built? Are the staff, the general manager of our locations, are they giving back locally? And then we look at governance, right? Annabelle, in this sustainable housing company that we're creating, is the CEO getting paid $100 million, right? While the workers get paid minimum wage? That shouldn't happen, right? We should try to pay people pretty equally. Is there corruption, right? If Drake is Drake siphoning off money, cooking the books, right? And are people, is Drake asking for payoffs, right? And taking money for himself? Sorry, Drake, to use an example here. Taxes, right? Are we avoiding our taxes? Or are we fully paying our taxes? And our board makeup, again, are there people on our board who can help us make good decisions? And is there diversity on our board? That's a lot of questions to ask, right? This is just one example. You look at clean energy products. Thank you, Derek. Education access for underrepresented groups, Alice. That's something I'm super passionate about myself. As a company, there are like hundreds of different criteria within environment, social, and governance that you can look at. So you can make a better company that's better for the world and better for society, right? And we'll talk about this more later, but increasingly, people are saying it's not only a better company because it's better for the world, but it's actually just better business, right? And we'll talk about this more, but if you have an ESG, strong or positive company, you're more likely to be profitable and to be around for decades and centuries and be a good investment. And this brings me to the investor lens. Now, let's say, again, we're the investor. I'll use a good example of this, actually. If any of you want to like listening to podcasts, we have a podcast on any platform you listen to. It's called Investing in Integrity by Scholars of Finance. And I believe it was episode 5 or 6. I interviewed Scott Mather. Scott Mather is the CIO of PIMCO. At the time of the recording, they oversaw $2.2 trillion in assets, most of which was in ESG positive assets, right? So as an investor now, you think, oh, I'm going to change the world building a company. And, maybe you build $1 billion company. There are financial firms that manage trillions of dollars, thousands of times what companies manage, right? Like a BlackRock who managed $10 trillion. They actually own like thousands and thousands of companies, right? They're so much larger. And so, with Scott Mather, you can listen to that episode where we talk about this quite a bit. Whereas an investor, now we're looking at, at all these companies we could invest in, whether public or private companies. We have 1,000+ criteria that we can look at to determine, is this company, doing everything they can to be, good on our environment, to be good to people, and to have good governance in place. And increasingly, investors are not putting their money into companies that don't meet these criteria, which we'll talk about in some detail. So I'll pause there. That's sort of an overview of ESG. Drake, is there anything you want to add or any other clarity, any points you want to clarify or simplify before we move on?
Yeah, I mean, I think that sums it up really well. Just a couple of points to hit home here. Number one, it's just becoming a much more broader and inclusive term. So there's just a lot more being included in ESG. I think it's important to realize it's evolving over time. And then secondly, to Ross's last point, there's this contention that good and gold can't exist, but that's been challenged recently with the advent of ESG. And what we're seeing now today is so many investors, so many companies are realizing that good and gold can coexist. And doing so, like Ross says, not only helps people, helps the environment, helps entire communities, but it's good for the companies themselves, and it's also really sustainable. So if we look at the long term, ESG is going to really help companies succeed, both in terms of its impact and economically. So I just want to put that point home, but I think you summed it up really well, Ross.
Thanks, Drake. With that, Drake, I want to pass it over to you so you can do a bit of a deeper dive on some of the screening mechanisms. And while you're doing that, Drake, I'm going to work with Serena to update the settings so everybody can send their chats to the whole group. And people can hopefully get.
That sounds great. That sounds great. So moving on, let's talk more about ESG from an investing point of view. When you're an investor, the way to include ESG is through this idea of either positive or negative screening. And what this means is when you're looking at companies, you can either include them in your portfolio because of certain ESG metrics, or you can exclude companies from your portfolio because of certain metrics. So let's talk about positive screening first. This is the inclusionary aspect of screening, and you're favoring investments that really have a strong socially conscious record and have impact ingrained in their business model. So for example, you can think of a renewable energy company, the sustainable housing that we were using earlier as an example, community involvement, anything that's really driving a positive impact through the business model itself. Those are companies that you include in this idea of positive screening in your portfolio as an investor. Now, on the flip side, you have something called negative screening, which has similar goals, but a different methodology to get there. And that's excluding companies that essentially don't align with your ESG goals. So there's different categories for this. There's one called Syn Companies, which we'll talk about in a little bit. Another one called social and environmental negative impact companies. And then others are based on personal preferences for companies that you want to exclude. So for these Syn Companies, they could include alcohol, tobacco, gambling, etc. Your typical what people view as sin activities. And then for the social and environmental negative impact companies, these can include companies that produce a lot of fossil fuels, for-profit prisons, something that people view as negative toward either the environment or to social structures. And then lastly, the other category we talked about is personal preferences. These could include companies that produce firearms or stem cell research. Anything for an investor that they don't necessarily agree with, they can exclude from their portfolio, and this will allow them to create a more positive ESG portfolio in their investing. Ross, I don't know if you wanted to include anything here about positive negative screening. So I'll pause here before we move on to thematic investing.
Sure. I think just one thing to add, Drake, for everyone, you'll hear a lot of different terms in investing and impact. You hear thematic investing, impact investing, ESG. Some investors, interestingly, will sort of call negative screening ESG, and they will call positive screening impact investing. Or more broadly, they'll actually just broadly refer to it as impact investing if you're doing positive screening. That's the only thing I wanted to add, Drake. I think you did a great job covering this.
Yeah, no, thank you. And just to piggyback on that point, the reason that a lot of investors consider this is for the positive screening, and we'll talk about this for the thematic investing as well. Like I mentioned earlier, it's because these companies usually incorporate impact in their business model. So that will, be more driving impact in what they're doing. Versus for negative screening, they're excluding companies that have bad ESG practices. So therefore, they're just getting a more inclusive ESG portfolio. But that doesn't necessarily mean that these companies are driving a positive impact in their business model. So just wanted to clarify that as well. But let's move on to thematic investing. This is another approach that investors take. And essentially, it's saying that we want to target a certain trend or a certain theme while investing to be more targeted. And then there's also a lot of benefits to this, but this is different than targeting a sector or targeting specific companies. So examples of this include climate action, lifelong learning, sustainable living, inclusive growth. What you'll notice is these aren't specific sectors, these aren't specific companies, but these are just general trends that we're seeing that are creating a positive impact. And there's a few reasons that investors really do this. One I talked about is just being more focused in what they're doing, building the expertise there. But there's also these three reasons here. The first is that it's innovative. They're targeting companies that are really at the forefront of change. And this is good in the long term. And hopefully a lot of those companies will succeed in creating that positive impact. The second is access. They're getting into the market earlier on. So they have access to these companies that are on the upswing for this positive trend that we're seeing. And then lastly, it's also good in terms of quality. They're accessing really great companies that will be benefiting or contributing to these trends that we're going to see in the long term. So they won't be in industries that are going to die out in the next 5-10 years, but these will be industries that will be here to stay for the next 50, 100 plus years. Last thing I want to include here is that the UN has social development goals, which Ross will talk about in a little bit, but those are essentially 17 goals that the United Nations has outlined in order to reduce poverty and protect the environment by 2030. And a lot of investors today are basing their thematic investing goals and their sectors and thematic experience based on these sustainable development goals. So this has definitely been something that's been used much more recently, but it's been a much more popular concept in ESG and in impact investing. Ross, I'll turn it over to you if you want anything else to add to thematic investing here.
No, Drake, I think you did a great job. I think we can dive into the history.
Sounds good. I'll turn it back to you.
I hopefully don't bore everybody with the history lesson. The headline is that I want to dive into the history of ESG, and ESG has had a meteoric rise over the last approximately 17 years to become very, very popular among investors. The story of ESG investing really began in January of 2004 when former UN Secretary General Kofi Annan wrote to over 50 CEOs of major financial institutions, inviting them to participate in a joint initiative under the auspices of the UN Global Compact and with the support of the International Finance Corporation, which is the IFC, and the Swiss government. And the goal of the initiative was to find ways to increase our impact and advance impact in our society. A year later, this initiative produced a report, which was called Who Cares Wins, with Ivo Noteful as the author. And the report made a strong case that embedding environmental, social, and governance factors into capital markets makes good business sense and leads to more sustainable markets and better outcomes for society. At the same time, UNEPFI produced the so-called Freshfield report, which showed that ESG issues are relevant for financial valuation. These two reports formed the backbone for the launch of what were called the Principles for Responsible Investment, or PRI, at the New York Stock Exchange in 2006, and the launch of the Sustainable Stock Exchange Initiative the following year. The steady growth of ESG investing was really accelerated year after year after year. Around 2013 and 2014, when the first studies were published showing that good corporate sustainability performance was associated with strong financial results. Work by academics like George Serafeim, Bob Eccles, and Iana Sianu showed the importance of ESG information for assessing corporate risks, strategies, and operational performance. So in January 2015 and January 2016, the 17 Sustainable Development Goals were launched by the UN, in what was called the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, adopted by world leaders in September 2015 at a historic UN summit. Over the next 15 years, with these new goals, again, world leaders in the UN came together in 2015, and they put forth 17 goals to eliminate poverty and hunger, for sustainable energy. And in 2016, these 17 goals were published. Over the next 15 years, with these new goals that universally apply to all of us, countries are mobilizing efforts to end all forms of poverty, fight inequalities, tackle climate change, while ensuring that no one on Earth is left behind. The SDGs, also known as global goals, build on the success of the Millennium Development Goals and aim to further go further towards the end of all forms of poverty. The new goals are unique in that they call for action by all countries, poor and rich and middle income, to promote prosperity while protecting the planet. They recognize that ending poverty must go hand in hand with strategies that build economic growth and address a range of social needs, including education, health, social protection, and job opportunities, again, while tackling climate change and environmental protection. And while the SDGs are not legally binding, governments are expected to take ownership and establish national frameworks for the achievement of the 17 goals. Countries have the primary responsibility for follow-up and review of the progress made in implementing them. All right. Today, now, if you fast forward to today, the present, ESG has become widespread. In Europe, regulatory oversight is increasing, for instance, so that ESG ratings will become more reliable and useful over time. Even in the US, we've seen some landmark legislation passed. In June of last year, the US Senate passed a comprehensive bill that would require all firms, all companies, to disclose their ESG standards quarterly and annually. Right? It's super encouraging. It still has to pass, through a number of steps in the process legislatively, but it's a big step. And again, in January of 2022, the California Senate passed a bill, the first law in the US, requiring companies to disclose all their greenhouse gas emissions. On the corporate side, Larry Fink, if you don't know this name, Larry Fink is the CEO of BlackRock, which I mentioned earlier, the world's largest asset manager with $10 trillion in assets. He has been publishing letters since 2012 about ESG. And in his letters, he has increasingly stressed the importance of ESG in their portfolio companies, the companies they manage, right? The companies they own. In his most recent letter, he actually advocated for stakeholder capitalism, right? Where we have a version of capitalism that isn't just about making money, but it's about taking care of every single stakeholder or person central to your business, right? So your customers, your employees, your vendors, the people who sell you your supplies, your suppliers, the communities you live and work in. So really we view ESG as this development and the sort of evolution of capitalism broadly. And that will, Drake, anything else you want to add there, or should I jump into today?
You can jump into today. I think this will be a good flow here. So I will move the slides here.
Move to our next slide. So to give you a sense of ESG today, 90% of publicly traded companies have adopted ESG principles, right? Or goals for their businesses. Today, over $35 trillion worth of assets are being allocated using ESG as a screening metric. That's a lot of money. With another stat we found, 45% of Gen Z, pretty much all of you on this call, stopped purchasing certain brands because of ethical or sustainability concerns, right? So it's becoming mainstream, largely speaking. With that, I'll talk to you a little bit about what the critics say. Like, what do the critics say about ESG? If we can go to the next slide, Drake. First of all, greenwashing. You can bring all four of these onto the screen. These are some main criticisms you'll hear about ESG, and the proportion. Scott Mather actually talks about this in our podcast episode. He says this: the proportion of investors who have these critics is decreasing over time. So less and less people, make these critiques. So four main criticisms. The first is greenwashing. It's inauthentic. If you've never heard the term greenwashing refers to inauthentic behavior that companies participate in to make themselves look more ethical or more socially conscious than they actually care to be, right? Maybe they do a little bit of nonprofit work. It's like the big oil company who does a little bit of volunteering with sustainable energy nonprofits to mask like the terrible environmental impact they're having, right? This is what greenwashing is. And so a lot of investors will say, oh, ESG, it's, people are just greenwashing. They're pretending to care because, this is what everyone's talking about today. This is the current thing, and it's a fad. Well, to that, what I wanted to do for all of you on this call is arm you with rebuttals to these critiques. So when someone says, oh, people are greenwashing, what I would often tell them is that that's okay. Honestly, if people are greenwashing, here's why. If literally every investor says, hey, we're going to have ESG principles, right? Even if for some subset of them, it's not authentic. That's trillions of dollars of more money that's only going to companies that are good for the world. Whether the person doing it, actually cares or not, that's to me tangential, right? You want companies to be better for society. You want to save the environment, you want to help people, and you want good governance. And so even if some people are greenwashing, that's okay. That's just more money that's going to good businesses. Now, that said, I tell people who invest, you should try to find the people and discern who is authentic, who is genuine, who isn't greenwashing. Ideally, you invest your money with those organizations. And you can look at organizations and just look at their initiatives, look at their metrics, look at their public reporting, and see how authentic their efforts seem to gauge whether or not this is somewhere where you want to have your money invested to go and do good, right? Or if you're an investor looking at companies, you can look deep into their metrics, their reporting, their initiatives to see if it's just window dressing, it's just words, their ESG efforts of the company, or if they really mean it. That's the first point. The second point, is disparate standards. Another major barrier has been the lack of data and the necessary tools to get a handle on the fragmented and incomplete information available, right? There are different types of criteria and screening metrics from organizations like the Global Reporting Initiative, GRI, the MSCI, the IIRC, the US-based SASB, the Sustainability Accounting Standards Board, PRI, right? The Principles for Responsible Investment. So there's lots of different sets of metrics and rating agencies who are looking at companies through their own set of ESG criteria. And some investors will say, oh, it's so hard. It's so hard for companies when there's all these different standards. Companies don't know what to optimize for, right? It's confusing. It's onerous. It's hard. It's disorganized. To that, what I say, and what I've heard a lot of investors say, is that over time, the principles, the criteria, the rating agencies, they actually consolidate, right? Some of you, if you're in college or high school, if you've ever taken an accounting course, you've heard the term GAAP, GAAP, Generally Accepted Accounting Principles. This is one universal set of standards that all U.S. companies have to use, that all U.S. companies have to use for their accounting, right? Now, if you go back a century or two, there were not GAAP principles. There was not one set of accounting standards. There were 100, then there were 20, then there were 3. Now there's one, right? There's one standard set of accounting principles. And a lot of investors believe the same thing is inevitably happening in ESG. GRI and PRI and MSCI, SASB, all these organizations will probably consolidate around one single set of metrics. And you're seeing legislation passed where large government bodies are actually setting out that they are going to set a single standard of metrics, right? So this will resolve itself over time, right? Number 3, it's meaningless. There's no real impact. This is the third. The first two are the two biggest ones you'll hear. These are the most common things you'll hear. The third and fourth are if you're talking to someone who's more of a sophisticated investor. The third is, okay, I'm an investor and I've got $1 billion. And instead of I'm going to move it out of oil and gas into sustainable energy. And when I sell all of my oil and gas company stock, there's somebody on the other side of that buying it. It's just money exchanging hands. So me selling my oil and gas and buying sustainable energy doesn't actually change anything. The oil and gas company is still, someone else bought that $1 billion worth of shares, and that oil and gas company, it's business as usual, right? Now, this is really important to grasp. One of our advisors at Scholars of Finance, his name is JC Despoint. He's a partner at a hedge fund. They were actually some of the protagonists in The Big Short, the moral protagonists, we'll say. And he teaches the ethics and finance seminar at Princeton. He teaches ethics and finance at Princeton. And he wrote a really good book that I would highly encourage all of you to read. It's called Seeking. It's really dense. I will say that it's like an academic read. It's called Seeking Virtue in Finance. It's an excellent book. And he explains, he does a really deep analysis, and he explains that yes, ESG today, it's not maybe necessarily making a huge impact when you as an individual investor move your assets, but we all need to do it, because if all investors have ESG criteria, right, surrounding their investments, once you reach a sufficient majority of investors who are doing this, pretty soon it forces companies to change. Because now if I own $1 billion of this oil and gas company, there's less of a market or less buyers. When I'm selling and getting rid of this oil and gas company, there's less people to buy it. And it's going to crush their stock price when I sell, right? It's called downward pressure on cost of capital. And so if you, to make the point very simply, if 100% of investors in the whole world said we're only investing in, strong ESG companies that pollute, that treat their employees terribly, they will not be able to raise any money. There will be no money no one will give them any money. Right. So making the point simply, if we all do it, it actually has its intended effect. So everyone needs, whether companies or investors, need to adopt ESG faster, right? So we can more quickly, dissolve businesses in society that are bad for us and are bad for people and the environment. Simply put, the fourth criticism here is that it's damaging, right? It's damaging. There's inflationary pressure. When you say, hey, we're actually seeing this today. People in their ivory tower can say, hey, let's all divest from fossil fuels and invest in sustainable energy. Well, pretty soon the cost of oil and gas is going to go up a lot. And who's that going to predominantly affect? People that can't afford Teslas, right? Like people who are in poverty, people who are low income, even middle income. Like a lot of people say ESG, it actually makes products more expensive for the people who can't afford it, right? There's this inflationary pressure. And the rebuttal to this point is that this does happen, and we need to be conscientious about how, when we're changing our investment capital and changing the business landscape, that we're investing in new businesses that make heating and cooling and transportation and food available for the people who need it most, right? That we actually take care of them proactively in our investment efforts. And the last thing, which Drake alluded to earlier, which isn't on the slide, is call it distraction. A lot of institutional investors were initially reluctant to embrace this concept, arguing that their duty as an investor is to make the most profits for their shareholders, regardless of anything else, right? It's sort of the Milton Friedman view. Well, only part of Milton Friedman's view, that the only thing that matters is maximizing profits ASAP for the people who are your shareholders. But again, we've been seeing more and more reports and more evidence, growing evidence that ESG metrics and ESG positive businesses actually outperform financially in the long term. Right. So increasingly, investors are actually seeing ESG as part of their duty, as like a way to maximize returns. Drake, so that's that. Drake, anything else you want to add here, or do you want to move on?
Yeah, just really briefly, I think those are all the main, arguments and rebuttals. But I think just generally speaking, we have to recognize that we have to take a more macro level approach to ESG when looking at this, and understand it's a movement. It's growing, and rather than be focusing on individual processes or the motivations or individual actions, those are all important, but we have to, at the end of the day, say, okay, what's the impact that's going to be had while implementing ESG? And if we all do it together, where is that going to get us? And as we've seen over the past 17 years, as Ross talked about earlier, we've been able to improve as a society that much more. And if we continue this movement and carry this momentum, then the world will just be a lot better off. Businesses will succeed. It's a win-win situation. So it's important to not get caught in the nuances and help others realize that, but still be conscientious, as Ross said, to making sure that those who can't afford certain services aren't negatively impacted by this movement. That's the only thing I wanted to add there, Ross.
Thanks, Drake. Excellent point. I'm grateful that you added that. And we'll talk about ESG in the future. So there's 4 things we want to talk about. So you sort of have a sense of where ESG is today, some of the critics and some of the critiques and rebuttals. And now I want to talk about where it's headed, or where the industry generally, or at least who we speak with, think it's heading. First is just asset growth. We mentioned that today there's about 35 trillion in assets that are ESG positive assets or screened assets. In 3 years flat, that's expected to grow to 53 trillion. Those numbers are going to reverse. That's almost 20 trillion of incremental assets that are ESG positive or ESG screened. And in fact, by 2025, it's projected there will be about 140 trillion of assets under management, in our sort of primary financial system, meaning that ESG assets will account for more than a third of all assets under management, right? Including due to a lot of factors, including the shifting regulatory landscape, the increasing awareness of the benefits of ESG, and the public's influence on ESG and all of our access to information, right, where we can choose ESG positive companies. Number 2, sustainable investing will dominate the conversation. The E in ESG, we believe, will become the most prominent component of ESG. That's vastly different from 15 years ago, when the top considerations were social factors like corruption and war. One of the reasons for the shift is due to the increasing needs to address the environmental crisis in our world. Another reason is that environment currently is one of the most measurable of all the ESG components. It's easier to measure how much carbon a company is producing than how much a child is learning in school necessarily, at least today. So we think that will continue to be the predominant trend that we see. Other dominant parts of the conversation, with the racial reckoning that we've had around the globe during COVID, diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging will be another primary component of that conversation. And just given the exorbitant socioeconomic inequality between the rich and the poor, we believe that CEO pay and equality will be a dominant thread in this conversation in the years ahead as well. Or at least we hope they will be. We genuinely hope those will be primary conversations. A third trend is the data, right? Is the metrics that we have. Data will become more robust. It will be more reliable and accurate going forward. So ESG data will give investors a much clearer picture of the socioeconomic impact of a company or project and help them make more informed decisions. Again, historically, the data, has been outdated, it's been limited, but the data revolution that we've been in over the last several decades, and that's only accelerating right now, will enable access to trillions of data points, right? Using satellites, using all different types of measurement, looking at, factors like deforestation, carbon impact, et cetera. So we actually think the data will get much better. And fourth, and this is, I would say, a hope than a prediction. ESG screening will simply be referred to as investing, right? It's kind of funny, like if you're an investor, no one talks about how you've got to look at the balance sheet, you've got to look at the cash flows. There's not headlines about examining the cash flows or the profit of a business. It's just inherent in the word investing, right? And so what we'd like to see, we hope to see in the years and decades ahead, is that ESG becomes this movement, and then you almost don't even hear about it anymore because it's just an everyday part of investing, right? Just like you look at cash flows, you look at profits, you look at investment allocation, you look at environmental, social, and governance factors as well. And that's just part of your standard everyday analysis, right? And when you're trying to go into investment banking or private equity or venture capital, when you're in college, that's just a standard part of your like finance 101 course, right? It's not this like separate thing. So we think it'll just become commonplace. With that, Drake, I'm going to turn it over to you to talk about the future of ESG, hopefully the people on this call. So I'd love to turn it over to you as you just successfully recruited and got an offer at Blackstone. Congratulations on you accepting your offer this week. Would love to turn it over to you to talk about career opportunities in ESG for all the people on this call.
Yeah, I really appreciate it, Ross. So today, what we talked about so far is what ESG is and, just like the overall history, present, and future of it. But I think what's the most important thing about this call is how can you get involved? Because there's so many opportunities today and it's continuing to grow that no matter what you're interested in, what you want to do, if you want to make a positive impact, then you have the ability to do so. So first of all, there's a few approaches to saying, okay, how do I actually want to get involved? I'll talk about my approach as well and how that actually plays out. One of the first questions you have to ask yourself is, do you want to approach impact? Do you want to approach ESG from a more macro level point of view, or do you want to do it by focusing on an organization, right? That will separate, investing versus going into policy versus going into a corporate organization, starting your own company or working for a nonprofit. So that's the first question you still need to ask yourself. Next question is, okay, do I want to do this through the private sector or the public sector? On the public side, I mean, you're making the rules, essentially, you're giving the guidelines, but on the private side, you're actually implementing. This is what's in practice, and it technically probably, like, I don't want to say this as a whole, but it has more of an impact through the private sector. And then lastly, you have to figure out, like, what exactly do you want to do? Do you want to be having more quantitative work involved in ESG? Do you like reviewing? Do you like implementing? What are your certain focus areas that you are really passionate about? These are all the things that you need to start thinking about as it relates to a career in ESG. But I'll walk through all of these individually and talk about my approach afterwards. If you go down the investing route, there's so many opportunities as we've talked about today. You can go into a pure impact investing firm. These are companies or investment firms that solely invest in impact-driven companies. You can go into private equity, which is essentially investing in private companies, and a lot more private equity firms are incorporating ESG, as we talked about, in their investing process, as well as investing in impact companies. You can go into venture capital. This is investing in more startup companies, and you can invest in social impact entrepreneurship firms. And you can also do public equity. You can do hedge funds and invest in ESG related companies on the public market. These are your, think of the S&P 500 companies. On another note, you can go into policy. You can work for a think tank. You can generate ideas relating to ESG. You could be a policy analyst. You could be a legislative aide working for a politician and advocating for certain issues. You can go into lobbying and lobby for example, the Sierra Club. They advocate for environmental standards and practices. You can go down the corporate and entrepreneurship route. You can work in ESG compliance for a firm. You can work in the legal sector for a firm or your own in a law firm and advocate for ESG issues. You can be a founder of a social impact company or a company that just really follows ESG rules. You could be a C-suite at a startup as well. And there's also standards that we talked about. There's SASB, there's GEARS. These are all the ones measuring ESG. And that's another viable career option as well if you want to be more in the front of measuring ESG. And then lastly, there's also the NGO nonprofit route. Here we just listed out some of the sectors you could focus on. It's really an open book, and there's a lot of roles there. So for me personally, the way I thought about it, as Ross alluded to, and this is part of the Scholars of Finance, is okay, how could I position myself to really make the most impact out of college and in a career? And to Ross's point, for Scholars of Finance, we've really learned that in finance, you just have so much power in stewarding capital for the greater good, and you're in charge of allocating capital to different areas of society. So for me, that was an important consideration of wanting to go into finance. And I saw a lot of power in the private markets because that is just a more illiquid market. There's a lot more companies in the private markets, and these are really more of the growing firms. So I decided to work in essentially private equity and impact investing, which I can talk about if we have questions about what that recruiting process looks like, how to get involved. But I just saw it as a great lever to really implement what I love doing while making a positive impact. So that's the way I approach the recruiting process, to really have a career in ESG and impact. And hopefully that will stay with me for the rest of my career. But Ross, if you have any more notes for how to really get involved with ESG, I'll turn it over to you here.
No, Drake, I'm actually having a moment where I was like beaming with pride. I think you did an excellent job. You did a great job recruiting. And I think you described the thesis so well. I've got nothing to add. I think you
Awesome.
nailed that. That was perfect. And
Appreciate
with
it.
that, would love to just open to Q&A, everyone. There's already 3 questions in the chat. I've updated our settings so that you can just unmute yourself. You can turn your video on, join us. Hey, you can just turn your video on, unmute yourself and join us. And this can be much more conversational. What I'd love to do, just to kick us off, Brian, Tylai, if I'm pronouncing your name correctly, and please do correct me if I'm not, and I apologize in advance. And Derek, I'll answer your 3 questions first. If anybody wants to ask a question, if you feel more comfortable using the raise hand feature, so we can call on you and invite you to ask your question, go ahead. But if you just want to unmute, turn your video on, or you don't have to turn your video on. If you want to unmute, introduce yourself, and ask your question, feel free. So I'll take these questions in order first. So Brian, your question first. You said, I read an article that said greenwashing didn't only affect public companies, but also the actual credit rating agencies that determine ESG scores. Even though these agencies are bringing more money to ESG, isn't that technically also bringing more money to bad causes? Not necessarily, Brian, right? So when you look at the rating agencies, all the primary rating agencies, they have very, very detailed analyses. Like if you go on the MSCI website, they actually show you an example of all of their different metrics, and you can actually see the raw data they have on just one paper company as an example. It's super deep. It's a very, very deep dive. And so all the primary rating agencies that really carry any clout, they have PhDs, they have, highly sophisticated engineers and data scientists, climatologists, et cetera, on their teams, building out their criteria and their screening metrics. So on the whole, I would say you can feel confident that rating agencies are doing a great job at scoring, companies relative to their peers on their ESG-ness. Number one. Tyler, to answer your question, it's interesting. So you said, hey, is there a chance the result of the studies, some of these studies that show that, some companies outperform, they're more conceptually sound. They have more resources to meet these ESG standards. It's an interesting question. And I would say, yes. Some people, one of the arguments against ESG is there might be like sector favorability, right? Like if you're a tech company, you don't have to cut down trees for your product, right? If you're doing software, you can launch 1 million more users, and there's only a little bit more computing power and electricity taken, right? And so certain industries are better for ESG. Well, that's a good thing for us to know, isn't it? Because we know that we can invest in certain things as a society that generally are more conceptually sound. So it's kind of a circular question, right? It's like, are companies that are more conceptually sound, are they better able to meet the ESG metrics? Yes, because ESG metrics are a way to find companies that are more conceptually sound. You see that, how it's circular? So the answer I would say is yes, absolutely. You'll see companies that are better for the world meeting these criteria and getting more assets, right? And then Derek, your question as well, what is the training and education needed to become an ESG investor? Now, there's 2 answers to this question I'll offer you. And the first answer to your question is, again, hopefully one day, and all investing is ESG investing. And the second is there are like ESG analyst roles, thousands of these on LinkedIn. So on the second point, if you want to go into like an ESG team, everyone hear me loud and clear when I say this, it is super competitive and you have to work super hard to get one of the spots, right? If you want to go and be like on the sustainability team, like the people who are, I remember being in college, I was so passionate about sustainability and I couldn't believe how competitive the landscape was. And I didn't get to go to UPenn. I went to a state school initially, right? So I didn't have like the top finance school in my resume to put me at the top of the resume stack. It's a super competitive space because a lot of people who are super passionate want to go into it, right? So you should plan on just spending a lot of time. What training and education is needed? You're here. This is a great first step. You're in this initiative. That's an amazing first step. I think that probably puts you in the top decile or top percentile, right? Even as being on this call today, potentially. Of course, acknowledging that some people may have had family conflicts, they might have a job. There might be good reasons why they can't be here at this time. So I don't want to make a blanket statement. I would say read books on ESG. There's a really good book, Conscious Capitalism, by John Mackey, co-CEO of Whole Foods, that I think is a really good one. Just Google top 10 books on ESG and read a couple of them. Look at the PRI. Read the Principles for Responsible Investment. Read the 17 UN Sustainable Development Goals. Right. Look at the MSCI website and look at some of their metrics. Read Larry Fink's investor letters. A lot of the things we referred to today, just go and just nerd out. Just spend like hundreds of hours reading about all this stuff to put yourself at the top of the distribution curve of your knowledge and capability. Generally speaking, if you want to get one of those roles, and I would start networking with people in those roles ASAP, like senior year of high school, freshman year of college. Reach out to people who have like ESG team or sustainable investing, right, in their job title, and send them a LinkedIn message. Make your LinkedIn profile, send them a LinkedIn message, asking if you can grab 15 minutes of their time to learn a little bit from them. Yes, Brian, thank you, by the way, in the chat for answering Derek's question. Thank you, thank you. Now, that said, like we've said earlier, that's the second answer to your question. Now, the first answer to your question is, again, hopefully all investing becomes ESG investing. So what I'd encourage you to do is, try to get in the best school you can. Try to get a degree if you can in economics, right? Or like a PPE degree or a finance or a mathematics degree, something that will help you understand the math behind the finance. I would encourage you to study other systems as well. Study history, study philosophy, study psychology. Try to understand like the complexity of the world so you can be a strategic conceptual investor potentially. That'll also differentiate you among other people who want to go into finance, right? Who have a broader lens, who can see the world at a 30,000 foot view and dive into the math and the financial model, the Excel spreadsheet, right? So just, you can also get in finance organizations. Sorry for the shameless plug, but like when you go to college, if there's a chapter of Scholars of Finance, definitely apply and like join SOF at your school when you're in college. If there's not a chapter, apply to launch a chapter at your school. Drake, if I may use you as an example, Drake literally his senior year of high school learned about SOF and reached out to me directly asking if he could help co-found the chapter before he even graduated his senior year. And I was like, wow, yeah, of course. That's like, I was so impressed. Right. And so even, that early you can reach out and you can plan on helping launch, when you become a freshman at your college. We've had a lot of freshmen help launch a chapter in the past. And there's lots of other organizations. Your college hopefully has like an investment banking club or a finance club or an impact fund. There are plenty of other organizations, BLK Capital Management. Gosh, a lot of organizations where you can get hands-on finance experience. So I hope that answers your question. Drake, anything else you want to add here?
Yeah, just one more thing. I think also, maybe this goes without saying, but you just need to be also really passionate about ESG generally speaking, but certain specific areas within driving impact, right? I think if you go in it saying, oh, like, yeah, I'm interested in finance and like ESG seems cool, like, okay, like that's fine. But if you are really passionate about, education, right? Or financial inclusion or the environment, and you also have this background that Ross was alluding to, that just makes you, one, like a stronger candidate, but also it'll make you enjoy the work more and make you more passionate about it. And that'll just make you like a lot better of an investor as a result.
Absolutely, Drake. With that, I see a bunch of questions. Thank you, Drake. I see a bunch of questions piling up in the chat. Before we go to those questions in the chat, I want to pause to see if there's anybody who was like eager to unmute and ask your question live and invite you to ask your question. Anyone?
And feel free to raise your hand too. We can call on you as well.
Or give us like a thumbs up with the Zoom reactions if you think we should just keep answering the questions in the chat. Looking at a participants list. Up. We've got a bunch of we got a bunch of thumbs up. primarily from the people who put their questions in the chat. I don't know, actually, I'm kidding. So we'll keep going to our questions in the chat here. Cassidy, you asked, what are the current biggest issues with annual ESG sustainability reports put up by big corporations? I from my understanding, there's a lot of issues. A couple that I hear frequently are, number one, like opinions, right? Like people will say what they're doing, but they want to actually talk about the hard facts, like the results, the data, the real metrics. That's number one. Like people want to see real, metrics and data points that speak directly to the end impact. Not just like, we invested $1 million in ESG, but it's like, we helped plant 400,000 trees. Like people want the end result metrics. It's called output metrics, not just the input metrics. So people want real data of output and results. That's the biggest issue, I think, number one. And number two is that a lot of people aren't doing it. There's not enough of them. So I'll start there. Jaja, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, if there's any books about these topics recommended for a 13-year-old student, I am so glad you're here at the age of 13 and so impressed. Wow. Or if you're asking on behalf of a friend or a sibling, good on them. So to answer your question, I think Conscious Capitalism, which I mentioned earlier by John Mackey, is a really good book on this. I think it's a really, really useful book. Drake, I'm going to look at my bookshelf to the right and see if there's any other I'd recommend. Any you'd recommend, dude?
Not any that come to mind. I mean, I think there's also just good like articles online, and like Ross said, I would definitely read the Larry Fink letters. I read that like a lot of those this year, and those are like, first of all, like a lot quicker reads, but also give you a really practical sense of what corporations are doing today, what the logic is behind them. But Ross, I'll turn it back to you for the books that you're looking yourself for right here.
Yeah. I'd recommend two, both by a man named John Taft. He's the great grandson of President Taft. He's one of our advisors. He's one of our advisory board members and one of our mentors. He was the CEO of RBC Wealth Management with like 7,000 employees and 280 billion in assets. He was really successful in his life. He wrote two books. One of those books is called Stewardship by John Taft. The second book he wrote is A Force for Good by John Taft. So that's two more. Another book I'd recommend is called How Money Became Dangerous. How Money Became Dangerous by someone named Chris Varelis. And Drake, if you want to just pull those four book names and those names together, we can probably give that to Serena and share those later. Those are the four books that I'd recommend. Going down the list, Magana, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, please forgive me if I'm not. I'm planning on bringing this issue to my school in the form of a club. Do you suggest a certain topic which would be crucial for high schoolers to know to use as a proposal? Good on you. I am so encouraged to hear that. And just want to I want to affirm you in that. And I want to encourage you to just say how impressive that is and how important it is that you're doing that and how beautiful it is that you're doing that. Speak for myself. So for everyone else listening, I would encourage you to follow her lead and consider doing the same thing. That is beautiful. So Magana, here's how I'd answer your question. And for anybody else who's like, I want to, get other people in high school engaged in this. Ultimately, you have to find out what do your classmates and the people around you want, need, care about? What do they want, need, and care about? This is a principle of marketing, right? So Magana, I could say, here's the topic, but I'm not a 13-year-old. I don't know what 13-year-olds most want to hear and see right now, right? So I can't tell you necessarily. What I would do is go to your classmates, 10, 20, 30-year classmates, and ask them like, what's most important to them right now? What do they care about? How are they thinking about college? How are they thinking about majors maybe in college or what they want to do with their lives and careers, right? And maybe you find some kind of common thread. some common threads I think you may find, some common threads you might find that are probably likely are, you know, I want to do something that I love. I want to do something where I'm making an impact. You know, I want to make the world better, right? You might hear some of those threads. And so what you can do is you can say, hey, I'm actually creating a club around like investing and impact investing and et cetera. Because I learned that one of the best ways we can make an impact on the world is through finance and investing. And so I'm trying to start this impact investing club or this ESG investing club, whatever it is, right? Whatever you call it. Because so we can learn how to make the most impact possible in the world. And you might have some people like, oh, that's okay. I didn't know about that. That's super interesting. Let's go. So if you can sort of pick a topic that sort of dovetails into what people want to learn about in here, that's the best way to open up a conversation about this, right? For me in high school, I was really obsessed, actually. It was an obsession, frankly. And I didn't have the words for it. I said, I want to make an impact. That was what I said in like, especially early, late high school, early college. I want to make an impact. And what I found over the years is I finally was able to crystallize what I was actually seeking and articulate it succinctly. And I was looking for the one thing I can do with my life that has the highest probability of the deepest positive impact on the most people possible over the long term. That's it. That's what I've been looking for. And I would argue that impact investing, ESG, that is it. That is the one thing where you can have the most impact. So maybe that's how you frame it to your classmates. Yeah. And maybe you frame it as like, hey, we're trying to get people like help you get into college and like help you prep for college, you know, with like a really compelling story, you know, just try to fit the narrative of what you're trying to teach into what they want and need. Tyler, you said, is there an ETA on that legislation to make companies publish their ESG standards? TBD. In California, that's going to happen pretty quickly, I think. But at the federal level, that legislation was passed along partisan lines, right? And so TBD on if it passes the Congress, if it passes the House of Representatives. We'll see. So with that said, another couple of questions here. Derek, we will post the book. Annabelle, yeah, some common misconceptions about ESG, particularly among youth. I don't know. You tell me, what are the common misconceptions about ESG among people who are young today? My understanding was a lot of people just don't know what it is, what it means. There's not necessarily misconceptions. There's just a lack of awareness, right? Drake, what do you think? Yeah, you're probably better equipped to answer that.
Yeah. No, I think there's a few things. I feel like first and foremost, I think the youth actually have a pretty good understanding, relatively speaking, despite having less work experience and being closer to numbers. It's just more at the forefront of how we've been growing up. But I think there's a few things that are involved in misconceptions here. One is how to achieve ESG and impact. I think, at least for me, the way I thought about it until more recently was, you know, I have to do it through volunteer work. It has to be through nonprofit work. But I think what we're seeing in the real world is that's not necessarily true. And in reality, like that's actually a small portion of where impact is made. Like we've talked about through this presentation, a lot of it's done through the private sector and through finance specifically. So I think that's definitely one major misconception. Another one is just the general movement and how like much is tied to politics. Like I think the reality related to the legislation is there's swings to how ESG progresses over time based on the administration and how politicians vote on certain issues. So ESG is actually kind of closely related, for better or for worse, with the current political sway of a certain country or the world. So I'd say like those are the main two, but the main one is like how is it actually used in practice, how to actually get involved. And I think the general view is through volunteering, through nonprofit work, but I think the answer, as you'll realize, you're looking more into it, is actually through the private sector and through finance.
Drake, thanks for sharing. Yeah, I see a couple more questions from Sophia. How can you spread awareness of ESG among the youth population? Ultimately, we just have to get out there and spread it, right? So Sophia, just like anything else is marketed and sold and publicized, it's the same thing. Getting out there, doing talks, getting exciting speakers, posting on social media, going to classrooms, going to places where people haven't heard about it. One problem that I think happens with ESG and impact investing is there's sort of echo chambers, like the whole community of impact investors. They just all like have these places where they all get together and they talk to each other. And it's a bunch of people who are passionate about ESG or impact investing, just talking to each other, right? And they're not going out there and like spreading the word to all the people who aren't even aware of it yet, right? So if I were you, I'd say, are there ways for like, yeah, if you have a group like this where you get really, really involved, you get engaged, you have a club, you've got friends who are into it. This is kind of how we think about it as scholars of finance, right? Like we want to have our tight knit group where like all of us care about the same things and we all want to make an impact through finance. And then let's do events. And like we launched a podcast, for instance, right? That has thousands and thousands of listens. Like let's go and do things to reach more people that aren't in our club, to go and spread the good news, if you will, right? To reach more people and spread awareness. So yeah, social media, events, all the normal ways that people market and get the word out for anything else. Drake, anything you want to add there?
No, I think that makes the most sense. I think it's like that's the best you can do. I think it was Magano's idea is I think starting a club or like promoting this through a club is a great way to get real student involvement and engagement. And then as a result, it'll just continue catching momentum through what Ross said, social media, hosting speakers, just getting as much interaction and FaceTime as you can with these individuals to help them learn about what ESG is and how they can get involved. And Derek, yeah, that's a great idea as well. Is you can write news articles or blog posts if you have access to that as well.
It could be a really interesting flex. Sorry if people still say flex. You could maybe, I'm just trying to think of funny creative, like Derek Shen, you dropping ideas in the chat's got me brainstorming now for Sophia. And I'm like, what if you went to a talent show and you just literally just drop some cold, hard facts, right, about impact investing in ESG? I don't know. I'm just trying to think of like, what are ways where you could get a captive audience who didn't, say, oh, I want to learn about ESG, and like a bunch of people who are there for something else. So you can get in front of a couple hundred people and talk about this subject, right? So if anything, man, I would go to a talent show and be like, the talent that I want to share with you today is my talent for being able to figure out how to make the most impact on the world possible. Now, let me explain how. And people will laugh. You could probably do it in a way where people find it kind of funny, but then you could drop some like real knowledge on them. Maybe get some people thinking. It's a silly idea, maybe. I see, Derek, you also said, or Jimmy, what are some examples of how we can make an impact in middle school and high school? This is a really good question. And Drake, I'm super curious to hear your thoughts. But if I had to give you one single answer, Jimmy, and to anyone here who's curious about the same thing, what's the one single way you can make an impact in middle school and high school? It would be to help your classmates who want to go do good in the world. Two things. Number one, help your classmates who want to go do good in the world understand how they can do the most good. Drake touched on this earlier. They're like, oh, I want to go start a nonprofit. I want to do nonprofit work. There's actually a really good TED talk by a person named Dan Pallotta. Said the way we think about charity is dead wrong is the name of his TED talk. And he basically explains why charities don't even stand a chance at making a real meaningful impact on the world's problems like climate change and hunger, poverty, right? Nonprofits, you're going to make very little like systemic impact. You might raise a few $1,000s and help a few people now, but there are like hundreds of millions of people who need help. And nonprofits, because of the economic structure, simply can't scale, is what it is. It always feels a bit hypocritical for me to say that because we're a nonprofit, right? And I can unpack that later. We're a nonprofit helping the people who manage billions and trillions of dollars one day, right? So that's sort of where we get our scale. But those people who want to do good, tell them, listen, don't go into nonprofits, like go into finance. And instead of trying to raise thousands or millions of dollars, go raise billions of dollars to solve hunger and poverty and climate change. Because the problems, they're like $1 trillion problems. They're huge problems, right? That's the first thing, is like help them see how this can be a much more impactful path. And then get them started early, right? Get them started early on this impact investing or investing journey. The second thing that I would recommend is if you have classmates who are just like, oh, I just want to like go and have fun and make a ton of money, and like they don't really have a desire to help others or make the world better, I would actually try to spend some time with those people, right? And encourage them and help them see that a life trying to help others is so much more fulfilling. It's so much more rewarding. And it's what the world needs, right? Like there are so many people in the world who don't actually spend time helping others and don't care, right? All they care about is themselves. Whether it's money, it's status, it's fame, it's Instagram, it's Be Real, a new app I just learned about, right? Today, someone's like, will you be in my Be Real? I was like, what's that? He's like, just say something. I'm like, okay. So many people are so concerned with just themselves and like Netflix and fun and whatnot. I think they just need to be inspired or have their eyes opened to how much better a life is helping others and how much need there truly is and just how huge the need is. So Jimmy, that's the two things. Number one, the people that want to do good already, help them see that this might be the way they can do the most good. And the people who don't care about doing good, help get them on the bandwagon with us, all of us on this call, get them into our camp, right? Of going to try to change the world. I know that's a bit abstract. I hope that's helpful and I hope that's useful. Drake, anything else you want to add?
Yeah, I mean, I think just speaking from experience, there's a couple of things I did in high school and middle school that helped me. I think what Ross said was absolutely right. It's something I wish I did more of it. I'm trying to do more in college. But I think there is some benefit in the nonprofit work or the volunteer work and seeing what the issues actually are and seeing them up front. So for example, in middle school, I did like beach cleanups. I lived near a beach and I saw the impact of, oh, wow, like this is what pollution does to the wildlife, to the beaches, to obstructing the beauty of the world. Or, I ran a couple of nonprofits and saw firsthand what poor education looks like, what inadequate hospital systems look like. And you really get a sense of what's happening in the world and what can be fixed to give you a better sense of, okay, when I'm actually investing in something going forward, and when I'm helping spread this idea of ESG, how is this actually tangibly benefiting others? So I think that part is really valuable. And I think also just trying to get your hands dirty as well early on is great. So Ross was saying spreading this to others. I think that's an amazing idea. I think if you try starting a club, your own like business, something that has a tangential impact or tangible impact rather, that also gets you a good start of how do you start thinking like an ESG investor? How can I make an impact through this business means? And you just get the gears rolling so that in your career later on, or if it becomes successful then, you can make that impact at a higher scale. So those are other recommendations from personal experience.
Drake, I want to build on that. And I really appreciate you sharing how your nonprofit experience opened your eyes to some of the real problems and suffering. Oftentimes, Jimmy, this is still on your question here, Jimmy. People who want to do good in the world have oftentimes firsthand in their own life experienced pain, suffering, or adversity, right? It's a very common thread in people who want to go do good. Maybe they had a really rough childhood. Maybe they had a traumatic event happen growing up. They were bullied. I mean, I had all of those things actually happen in my own life when I was young in my childhood, which I feel vulnerable sharing, but I think it's important to share that. So a lot of people who want to do good, it's because they firsthand experienced adversity, et cetera. But then there's some people who grow up and they don't, right? They sort of have it like it's just been good, right? And maybe, they never had a really hard time. Maybe they didn't grow up in poverty. Their parents didn't get divorced, or they didn't lose a loved one at a young age, whatever it is. And I think to Drake's point, for them to unlock empathy, they have to see other suffering and other problems up close and personal, right? So even if they haven't experienced it themselves, like you said, Drake, one thing I do today, at least once a quarter, it's a commitment now, again, going into 2022, once a quarter, I want to go and volunteer with the homeless. I want to spend the entire day with the homeless population at least once a quarter. So Derek said, to put yourself in someone else's shoes, right? See how they lived, as Derek is saying. So, even if things are good for yourself, go out there and volunteer with the homeless, with the poor, with people who are in halfway houses, whatever it is, and invite your friends to come do it with you. That's something I did a lot in college, where instead of like, let's all go out and do, X, let's go party or whatever, I'd be like, hey, let's all go to like feed my starving children and go pack meals together. Right. And I'd invite my friends to join me on this, on these different volunteer outings. So Drake, I just want to +1 that. If people don't have the empathy based on their own life, help expose them to empathy of others' lives. So with that, everyone, it is 6:29 Pacific time. And we have to wrap up. So I just want to wrap up today by saying thank you so much. I hope you found this valuable and insightful. If you want to reach me or Drake, you can reach us at our emails. I'm ross@scholarsoffinance.org. Drake is drake@scholarsoffinance.org. So our first name at the name of our website. You can shoot us an email directly. And we're happy to touch base. Serena, want to thank you so much for your invitation today. And Serena, would love to turn it over to you to wrap us up as our gracious host.
Thank you so much, Ross and Drake. That was such an inspiring session. I really learned a lot. I'm sure everyone else on the call did as well. So yeah, just a few closing remarks. Thank you guys for joining us again. We do have another event specifically for youth ambassadors on April 23rd. So make sure you guys are checking your emails for that. This one specifically will be building off of this event, and we will be talking more about how youth can impact their communities through ESG investing and through the Sustainable Development Goals. And it is a panel discussion with time for Q&A at the end. And also April 23rd to 24th is also the main social impact investment conference. And I know, Ross, you are speaking at one of the events there as well. So if you guys are interested in that, that will also be on the email, just in case you wanted to hear Ross talk more. Yeah, so that was all I had all that I had to say. Thank you again for joining us today. And I hope everyone took away a lot from this session.
Awesome. Thank you, Serena. Thank you, everyone. Have an excellent day or night. Cheers.
Thank you, everyone.